Okay, the recording has started. Hi there, I'm Carrie Basas from the Governor's Office of the Education Ombuds. We've started recording, so that means if you are joining the meeting right now, you are being recorded as well. So what I would ask you to mute your phone line if you are dialing in, and if you have computer audio with a microphone, please mute that, because I have tried to go in and mute some of you as we've been going, but if others join us, make sure that you're muting yourself. Okay, so thanks so much. We may need to adjust the camera to make sure that everybody is in the line of sight. So give us a second with that. You may see some people pop up on the screen. And we're going to do more of a huddle, or adjust. We move down this way, and everybody move down a little bit.
Why is it not doing the white lens that you did before?
Move again.
I think if you show up on the screen, it will
but now I
make it wider.
I'll point.
I'll just like pop it.
Okay. You're going down.
Do I need to do that? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Trying not to get.
Okay.
No, you're getting out of the screen.
Okay. I think that's better. We are a little huddled.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just dip in, and we're good. So we're going to start now. Thanks for bearing with us. And I wanted to welcome you all. I'm Carrie Basas. I'm the director of the Governor's Office of the Education Ombuds. And we are talking about best practices for advancing inclusion for K-12 today. And one of the reasons why we're doing this is really of a personal connection to the work too. I was in a self-contained classroom as a child until 3rd grade. And now as the director of the Office of the Education Ombuds, in the past year I've participated in a lot of discussions about inclusion in which there have been no people with disabilities at the table. And so that's of concern. And I think that we need to start talking about ways that we can hear from graduates and current students about what inclusion looks like for them. And by that I mean students with and without disabilities, because many of us are using inclusion in a pretty broad sense, yet student voice and recent graduate voice is missing. And we know that inclusion early on affects all aspects of civic and economic life later. And so to the extent that we find ways to live together in society and recognize the strength in our differences, we're all better served. So I wanted to thank you all for joining. I want to give you a brief overview of how things are happening today. So we're going to spend a few minutes with the panel doing self-introductions and talking a bit about their disability experience and their K-12 experience. And then we're going to have a series of questions that I am moderating. But then we're going to leave the last 20 minutes today so that you all can ask questions. And if you're joining us by phone, that will not be possible. But if you are online, you can use the I am toolbar on the side. I also wanted to mention, if you are joining us by phone today, that we have the slides from this presentation online at our website, oeo.wa.gov. And if you go to the issue section under special education, you should be able to pull those up. And after this presentation, we'll record it like we're doing now and post it to the website. So I'm going to move forward and introduce Karlin, Ivanova, and Jordanos, and I'll have them talk a little bit about themselves and what their K-12 experience was like. I'm passing the orange ball.
We're going to drop it?
We're going to drop the mic first, because then you know it's a really good webinar to start with dropping the mic. There's nothing else left to do, really. Now you know all you need to know about inclusion.
That's it.
Karla, go for it.
I don't have anything else to say. So I'm Karla Mueller. I'm a current doctoral student at the University of Washington in special education. Been here for 3 years now in Seattle. My work is focused on disability identity development and sort of awareness of disability labels in youth. So what kind of meanings do students make out of their disabilities when they're assigned and told they have things like a learning disability or an emotional behavioral disorder? What do they understand about those labels, and how does that impact their behavior in school? And this work's really personal to me. And in fact, I came to grad school because I feel like we don't have these conversations around what kind of meaning students are making around labels. So I have cerebral palsy and significant learning disabilities. Spent my whole educational K12 career in a combination of inclusion and self-contained classes, and really learned about my learning disability and my physical disability through teachers and interactions with students at school. So we think about, the kinds of information that teachers are equipped with and the kinds of information that students sort of hear about what disability is, and I made a lot of meaning out of that and tried to process, okay, what does this mean about me in all of that? So I'm originally from the Washington D.C. area, so coming to Seattle is kind of a newcomer, but like here. So yeah. Oh, right, and I forgot we were supposed to do this. So I'm thinking about disability sort of at the midpoint of two things. So one way of thinking about disability is by the label, like I just talked about. So I have cerebral palsy. It affects the way that I walk. It affects the fact that I had to have 15 reconstructive surgeries before I was 15. But there is another way of seeing disability, which is that the world is constructed to privilege some kinds of abilities and not privilege others. So we do things like we build buildings, and then later we think about entrances for people who use wheelchairs. We build all sorts of environments to think about the needs of certain people first, and usually people without disabilities first. So I like to think about disability as that intersection between my body and the way that my body sort of works in the world.
Somebody else. My name is Ivanova Smith. I do a lot of disability civil rights work in Washington State. I'm very passionate. I identify myself as a person that has a developmental disability. I'm autistic, and I have learning disabilities that borderline with cognitive disabilities. And I was in when I went to school, I actually was held back in kindergarten because I just came to this country when I was 5 and a half. I lived in institutional orphanage for the first 5 years of my life in Latvia, and so I didn't learn how to speak in America, and I had to learn English. And they immediately put me, the first day of school, they immediately put me on an IEP because I was having a meltdown being taken to kindergarten for the first time. And that was very hard on my parents. They were given misinformation about my disabilities. The orphanage told them that I had developmental disabilities. But the adoption agency told my parents that everything that was wrong with me, I could grow out of, that it was just from being in the orphanage. And so my parents believed the adoption agency over the orphanage and tried to hide the fact that I had disabilities and learning disabilities. They felt really ashamed of that. They didn't want people to know. But I had many challenges. I did not learn how to read until I was in the 4th grade because the school would try to tell my mother that they could teach me how to read. And my mom was like, well, if you're not going to teach her, I will. And so my mother would take me out of my classes, and I would sit in the hallway with her, and she would teach me how to read. And I finally was able to learn how to read. But it was a challenge, and I think it was when thinking about disability identity, that was very hard for me to find when I was in school because I was borderline intellectually disabled, but I still was given access to mainstream classes because my parents very pushed for that. And so I got benefits that my peers with intellectual disabilities did not get. They had no access to academic courses. They were only given life skills, and but they had more protections than I did. I was bullied immensely for my disabilities and my way of movement, and it caused a lot of internalized hatred in myself. Like I had a lot of hatred in my identity, and I didn't like being in special ed, and it was a very hard time for me back then, actually. And so I think it's very important for children to be taught about acceptance and about disability pride when they're young, so that we don't start hating each other and hating ourselves.
Good morning. My name is Yordanos Gabraumlak, and I am extremely excited to be here. So thinking about my K12 experience, if I had to pick one word that defined that experience, I'd have to say fumbled. So I immigrated into the United States at age 5. So I think it was October of '88. And so I did have the opportunity to start from kindergarten, and I had ESL classes that I would go to, and then so I have Leber's congenital amaurosis, which means my peripheral is restricted, my peripheral vision. So I was going to ESL classes, and really the instructors there did not know, okay, well, what else do we do? Like, what do we do with this student who doesn't speak English? There's this diagnosis. What do we do? And so for a long time, I just went to ESL. And then later on, they said, okay, well, we'll put her on an IEP, and we'll give her, time and a half to complete certain assignments. And so I was doing ESL one period, and then I would meet with an instructor, an IEP instructor, so 2 periods, and then basically the rest of the time I was in a mainstream classroom. And it went like that for a few years. And as you can imagine, as you progress through years in school, of course, you're going to have different teachers and different IEP instructors. And some IEP instructors would say, okay, well, I don't understand why you wouldn't just be in mainstream all day and then just utilize your time and a half to complete tests, quizzes, and stuff. So then there were years where I didn't meet outside of the mainstream classroom. So it was really fumbled. That's the best way that I can describe it. I can remember IEP meetings where I was student and translator for my parents, which was awkward for a 10-year-old to, sit at the table with instructors and parents and having to play that role. And in thinking about this webinar, I kind of wanted to re-examine things that I'd experienced. So I had conversations with my family, why was I interpreter once again? Explain that to me. And so I was told that an interpreter came once, and my parents, they could hear more English than they could actually speak. And so what they were recognizing is that the interpreter was not fully interpreting, because what happened was when an interpreter is called for these kinds of meetings at school, they don't necessarily have to know sort of how, a school operates. They just kind of get them from whatever agency, so they can be sent to hospitals, they can be sent to schools. And so there was just a lot of things that were being missed. And so my parents discussed that with the school, and then I don't know how it went from having an interpreter present to no more interpreters coming. So that was incredibly just really strange for me as a child to have to play that role. And then throughout middle school, again, there was this back and forth with, well, you don't really need to be taken away from mainstream classrooms too. Yes, you absolutely do. And I remember in junior year of my high school, I had an IEP instructor. I had one that year, and it was incredibly odd for me that this particular IEP instructor decided that she was going to teach me world history. And I think about that a lot, and I go, was this something that for her to kind of just put on her resume? Because I hadn't been taught any subject outside of like a mainstream classroom. I would say there were definitely, though, benefits to being in special ed, because I got to get familiar with so many different types of technology that if, for example, my vision were to worsen, then I actually am, well, use it or lose it, so I'm not 100% fluent in Braille, but I was taught that. I got to use the CCTV. So there were definite plus sides that I just do not ever take for granted. But there are just also some troubling aspects of it as well. And thinking about disability, I was thinking about this. It's a straightforward enough question, but it's really
it's hard.
It's hard. It's really hard because, similar to what Karla said, I think about it sort of two spheres of it. So you've got the medical model, which views disability as either a mental or physical ailment. It needs to be cured, or if not cured, then it needs to be somehow, lessened with some sort of intervention. And then you've also got, though, that it is a social construct, and it's used by those who essentially have the power to do so, to exclude others. And disability is something that's changed over time. I can't remember the term, but like, for example, if you think about women in history and hysteria and how, that was seen as a disability, or, for example, like slaves who ran away, there was a term, I can't remember the term, but they were viewed as they can't possibly not have a disability. They want to run away from their masters. So it's something that's shifted over time, and I really do see it as social construct, but then also the medical model of it.
That's great. Well, and I think disability identity is hard for us, right?
Yeah.
And we can't necessarily speak for so many people who are in our community. And do we have one community? It's an issue. I call myself a crip, which makes people feel uncomfortable. And I haven't joined a gang, but it's reclaiming. You don't really do that as a government employee. It's reclaiming a term because, but I didn't have that growing up. And I think my identity didn't really evolve until university, to college, and law school, because it was the only person that I knew of with a disability, which was not the case in mainstream classrooms. So I wanted to go to questions because I know that we had some really great answers to all those. For some reason, there we go. So what I wanted to offer is some questions to get us started. And this first question is pretty self-interested because I am now raising a child with disabilities. So what messages did you get about disability identity at school? So that's separate from special education in many ways. So what was disability? Like what were you taught about how that fit into your definition?
Well, for me, I didn't know about my disability until high school when the counselors started telling me I was autistic, and I didn't even know what autism was. So I did not learn about it until then, and I tried to deny it because my parents were trying to deny it. And so they tried to tell me, oh, you're not really, that's just a communist. And I found my own document that said I was autistic, and I told them the documents, and they took the documents from me and were like, no, that's just a communist. I think my parents, they were just really scared. I think it was just, they loved me greatly, and I'm very grateful to all the hard work that they've had to put up with me. But they really loved me, and I think they just really didn't want people to see me that way because of all the barriers it could cause. And so it was very hard for them to talk to me about my disability, even though I tried asking them about it. kind of similar to your situation. I didn't really learn about disability pride until I got into college and learned about acceptance and that disability wasn't a bad thing, that it could be a good thing and a blessing. And that made me feel really good inside because when I finally got confirmed that I was autistic, I decided to get reevaluated just to confirm everything. And it got all confirmed. And I remember that day feeling so much relief because it wasn't my fault that I couldn't do some things and that things overwhelmed me. I felt better about my situation and about being in special ed. I felt better about my childhood. It felt less shame, and it felt really good. And so now I'm all about disability pride and wearing it like a badge and being like, I'm a proud autistic. I'm a proud DD person. I'm not ashamed of this. And not a lot of people in my community reclaim words like retard, but there's sometimes that I do reclaim that word just to make people shut up.
There's some power with it.
Yeah.
Oh no!
Heavy ball.
Oh, we're kind of doing it again. Okay. So I'd like to start framing this conversation by saying I'm as old as the ADA is. So I was born in 1989. ADA was passed in 1990. So I have this interesting sort of trajectory where as we were sort of deciding that like we wanted to have laws to include all people in sort of like the broader society. We wanted to be really intentional about including all of these different needs in as much as we could in the world. Like I was growing up in that process. So, and I didn't know until maybe graduate school when I was doing some of my own work on disability identity development that there were things like the capital crawl where to sort of organize for the passage of ADA, people with disabilities were getting out of their wheelchairs, using their, not using their assistive devices and climbing up the stairs of the Capitol in DC to fight for their rights as people with disabilities. And that, like, that historical sense of what disability has meant and the context for the fighting that has happened for those rights. Similar, I think, to Ivanova, just felt like incredibly empowering and sort of contextualized for me. Like, there's a bigger fight here that's not about the fact that my legs don't look like anybody else's. You know what I mean? Like, there's a political context and a political sort of power here within disability that I get to be a part of, and that's really exciting to me. Instead, in school, I think I was getting a lot of messages about things like, you look so normal, you do so well, it's like you don't even have a disability. And I think that there are a lot of messages we're taught. I think people without disabilities in particular are taught that that's the way that you are supposed to approach somebody, is that to sort of minimize the impairment itself, to try and make the person feel better, make them feel more normal. But instead, I think it just reinforced a message to me that said, you should be doing the work to look more normal. You should be doing the work to appear like you don't have a disability, instead of sort of saying there's this really like special important thing about me that makes me see the world in a different and unique way, and like I need to figure out how to use that as a tool as opposed to like being reinforced that it's not good.
Yeah.
So that's better anything.
So summer of 1999, I actually saw a flyer, and it wasn't in my school or anything. I don't remember where it was. Maybe it was like a community center or something. It said that there was a summer youth employment program for students with disabilities. And so that really piqued my interest because I was so interesting. I was in mainstream classes basically throughout a lot of my K-12 years, but those years are really isolating. So I wanted to go and meet other students with disabilities and be able to connect and form a community, because there wasn't a community that I felt that I could join at that time in my life. And so I filled out my application, went, and there were about maybe 40 or so students there. And summer of '99, so I was, I think, sophomore going into junior year of high school. So that's when my identity really started to form. And Carlin said so much of the stuff that I wanted to say.
We gotta start reversing the order, I think.
But yeah, no, I would definitely say that's when my disability identity started to form, because before that, like Carlin was sharing, it's even from like the IEP instructors themselves. Well, you don't really. One time I remember a computer was on. I'm jumping a little bit, but their computer was on, and I don't remember exactly what was on the screen or whatever, but I read it from where I was sitting, and the instructor turns around. She's like, "I still just don't understand why you're here," and I just did not know how to respond to that. Like, how does one respond to, I don't know why you're here? And so it so much, like I said, of Carlin and what you were saying, and what that, so you kind of got from people who did not have a disability, it's, oh, you know, you do, you know, so well. So to me, during the times when I could not do well because of my disability, that kind of like, well, I don't know, it as you can see, like I'm still trying to define how that made me feel. So yeah, I don't know what to say about that, but
Can I just jump in really quick?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really powerful hearing you like saying, what's the word? Validating some of the things that I was saying, which is that like I have not necessarily had a conversation with somebody who was who has had the same experiences with teachers in particular. So it matters to me that like there's at least two out of three, right, who have mentioned this idea of normalcy and like you appear so normal as a compliment.
Right. I've gotten that too. Like this thought that when I'm not rocking and I'm, you know, wearing my suit and tie, the times that people think that I don't have a disability. There was a legislator I was meeting with advocating, and they said to me, "Oh, I couldn't even tell that you had a disability. You're doing really well. You look very normal." And I felt really awkward by that because that wasn't my intent. And you know, like when I'm having a meltdown in the street, people are not thinking that, and it kind of felt invalidating. Like you're not really seeing all of me. You're seeing me in my, you know, professional dress, and you think that a person with a disability can't dress like that and be a advocate and talk to legislators. Like, you know, I'm just as retarded as I was before. I can't change that. You know, I'm just having fun with this reclaimed language thing right now. But
some teacher students. Language to start with. But you know, it's true. Like it makes a difference, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's this issue that people really do mean well. Those
compliments,
right? Like, wow, and you know, then it goes in the other direction. Like I'm sure each of you have been told how inspiring you are.
Yes,
and it's hard for us to. When I'm buying yogurt with my child, let me just tell you, unless the rest of you are buying yogurt with your child and you're feeling inspiring, then I am not inspiring in that moment. And I don't want to have a conversation about how inspiring I am. And it's not me being, you know, this is this issue, right? We, like other people who are marginalized, are always representing. And so whether you're just out having a meltdown, whether you just fell out of your car because you slipped on some ice, or you spilled coffee on yourself like other people do, or you forgot a meeting.
Tell my personal stories, Carrie.
While spilling coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
They're always kind of representing. And it's hard to be stared at and gazed at in that way and always have to be on. In some ways. And so I think that there's that subconscious part too, right? Like saying, oh, you're doing so well, but leaving space, like you were saying, for the times when I'm not doing well and I'm melting down the street, there's still value to that.
Yeah, like.
And I'm struggling with this subject because I do have a disability in this area and I do need support, but it doesn't make me any less valuable or...
And maybe to like to play with this language for a minute, it doesn't also make you any less normal.
No.
Right? Like the good behavior and the bad behavior is still bad behavior, whatever, however you want to frame that. They'll like
hard days, bad days.
Right.
Weaknesses, we all have them.
Are still in me. They're still in this same person, and that person has a disability. Like,
Yeah.
So
I can't take my disability. I can't just turn my autism off.
Right. So I think this can be I feel like this could be a big jump for people who haven't thought about disability in this way too, to think about, like, it's not, I don't know that necessarily I want to be complimented on all the times that I'm, you know, appearing like I'm managing the disability in a certain way, right?
And I would just,
but it's real. It's real.
And I would just also add to all of this. So when that compliment is being given, oh, you appear so normal and all this other stuff.
Or the reverse, you're so inspiring.
You're so inspiring. Just to consider, so if I weren't, what is it that you're saying about me then?
Yeah. It's hard for, like, sometimes, like, when we're giving compliments and we're giving awards, it's conflicting because you don't know if it's really sincere. Like, you know, do they just think I'm inspiring because I have a disability, or is it something I really have done to deserve this? And, like, it's also hard is when people, I feel like I've done something to deserve something, but then other people come up and say, oh, I think they just said that to you because they were inspired by you. And that's hard for me because it's like, well, I accept it anyway because, I mean, I want to feel good about something, and I like it when people say compliments to me, and I don't, it's hard for me, I don't want to think about if they weren't sincere about it. I kind of look at, well, how do they talk to me when I'm not around, and how do they feel about what I said? Like, I'm more going to focus on the attitudes and not the words. Like, I think a lot of people, they get really focused on language, but they don't think about the attitude behind the language. And so it's like, that's why it's like, I don't mind I wish that we would stop focusing on just banning a word. Instead, let's ban the bad attitudes about those words, because the word mental retardation was actually historically a politically correct word back in the 1950s to replace feeble-mindedness. And so if we don't want intellectual disability to be turned into a slur like mental retardation is, then we need to focus on the attitudes around these disabilities and not just the word itself.
Well, and this is why inclusion is so important, right? Because it's really through interactions with people in community, in schools, daily interactions, seeing Karlin for all the great things and the not so great things, seeing me for all the great things and the not so great things, seeing all of us in those ways as people. We're people. And I think a lot of times people, especially I think in my own family, want to save you from the pain, because when you aren't normal or labeled as that way by society, it's like, I just want to spare you what that feels like, because it hurts. It does hurt to be excluded. But we know, and I think it's really important with words, we know when people are not being genuine, or when there's a charitable approach, and it may not even be intentional. It's not animus or something like that. It could be that just seeing someone as other and putting them over here. So some of those compliments do that. I can only see you in this one way. So we have like 7 minutes for our open panel discussion. I know we could spend an hour on a question. So I wanted to do a real lightning round on your thoughts about self-advocacy, because that is a huge issue in schools, especially as students are transitioning. So what do you think is helpful when you're giving guidance to families or to schools? What's a helpful way of framing self-advocacy that doesn't further stigmatize students?
So I would say my advice would be to really trust in your own power. There were times when I wish I would have just listened to self and not like, oh, well, they're an instructor, like they should know. Really, really do understand how much power you have and that your voice is important and it should always be part of the conversation, and not to just kind of take something that's already been, set in stone for you and presented to you for something to follow.
What I would say about self-advocacy is learn about yourself, like as a disabled person, and like how that disability affects you. Or like if you have a child with a disability, talk to them about the disability and help them feel comfortable about it, so that they can start thinking about, what are things that that help me and not feel ashamed to ask for accommodation. The phrase I never want to hear from a parent is don't use your disability as a crutch. That's such a hurtful phrase to students with disabilities. It's so hurtful because it makes us scared to ask for help. It makes us scared to ask for accommodation when we need it. And so to be a self-advocate, you really need to learn about yourself. I didn't learn to be a self-advocate until I learned about autism and about how it affected me. And I felt more comfortable being able to ask for help, not until after I found out that information. And I stopped feeling ashamed about being the way I am. And so I would say is let your child feel pride in their disability. Let them feel comfortable in it. If you are a person with a disability, study about your disability and think about the ways it affects you so that you can be an advocate for yourself. And then maybe if you want to become an advocate, not just a self-advocate, you can advocate for the community like I do. I absolutely love this type of work, and I didn't learn it until I was a self-advocate, and I didn't learn that until I had disability pride.
Yeah. So maybe I'll take a little bit a practical sort of thing that I totally credit my special education coordinator actually in middle school for requiring all of the students on her caseload to run their own IEP meetings. So, and this started literally 7th grade, where she would give us cards that had the script of what we were supposed to be saying, and it was scaffolded, right? So there's ways to say, like, to give more or less support around this, but here are my goals for the school year. Here's where I'm at. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. And I literally sat at the head of the table and talked about those accommodations because they were mine. And so I think, if I didn't understand all the language, if I wasn't necessarily, that's a lot of like sort of special education focused language. But what it did was say, give me some ownership over that process. Give me some ownership over my own disability and the way that I wanted to talk about my own disability, and to sort of make it clear that it wasn't something that like the special ed teachers were running or had sort of some control over. So I think that would be an interesting thing to sort of think about doing, particularly for people who are working in schools. Are there ways in which you can give some of the power in the IEP itself and those IEP meetings back to the student? Because I'll tell you, I think that that's a really huge source of both information about disability for the student, but potentially a place where they can feel empowered around that.
Yeah.
From early on.
So let's do one more lightning question, and then if we're going to open it up after that to see who has questions for us, and you'll use the I am feature if you're online, joining us online for the webinar. Otherwise, clearly we could keep going for a while. And we have other questions that we have put out, so we can keep ourselves busy. But we would like to hear from you, too, if you can join us online. And if you want to, and you're on the phone and you have a cell phone, I want to include access for all of you to me. So one time, don't use it forever, text me late at night. Text me on my government phone at 206-430-0753, and that is a public record, my friends. Anyway, quick question. Sorry, I had to stand up in the morning.
To the Carrie Boss's radio show, and I love it.
Welcome to the podcast, Irreverence with your OEO omelets. I want you to tell me, because I have heard this from each of you, and this is the brief version. Many of us, what we were talking about, it's a process of disability identity development. What would a pep talk be to your younger self at a particular time? A few words of advice that you only realize now that you're older and wiser. And we will continue to get older and wiser, we hope, for sure. Okay, Jordanos?
Oh, what would I tell them? Well, this kind of actually goes back to what I was saying earlier about the advice that we give for a parent with a student with a disability or someone with a disability, to basically speak for yourself, stand up for yourself, and not accept any structure that's easy for the school or easy for the instructor that year. So my pep talk would be, you really know best. you know best, you know what works, you know what doesn't, and feel free to express that.
What I would say to my former self, my younger self, is it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You're not bad for this. You can't help this. Don't hate yourself for something you can't control. That was something I really needed to hear, because I thought everything was my fault. I thought that I was failing because I couldn't keep up, and I really needed somebody to tell me it wasn't my fault, and that it was going to be okay, and that I'm going to have a bright future even with this disability, and that it's not going to stop me from my dreams, and I just may need to go on a different route, but that doesn't mean that I can't fulfill my dreams.
Yeah, I think maybe just to echo, thank you, I don't trust myself, like, maybe just to echo some stuff that I said earlier, I think you're not alone. So it was really helpful for me to understand that there were other people with disabilities who were navigating a lot of the same issues that didn't really have anything to do with us. There wasn't something wrong with us. There was something wrong with the way that everything is set up. And that each of the, like learning about that community, learning about the political history, learning about all of those sort of contextual pieces matters so much. Matters so much. Yeah. And would have mattered to me when I was younger too.
Yeah. So I wanted to offer that if we're going to open it up for audience questions, if you have a question, you should see what looks like a little text bubble over on the side, which at the bottom of your screen, it looks like a thought cloud. You can type in questions there, which I will moderate. If we get some questions, we have some other questions that we had prepared for the middle section, so we could keep going. If you want to text me a question, you can text me right now at 206-430-0753. There are no giveaways for caller 25, but that's another way. I clearly have another calling in life. So that is another way for you to connect with us right now if you want to send a question. So I will look at the screen. There's nothing, and you can put a question there. Don't be afraid. So Ramona, thank you, Ramona. So in the context of school funding, oh, Ramona, I know what you were doing last night. I saw it on Facebook. What investments would help students with disabilities? Well,
yeah, you take it, Carrie.
Hot dog. You know, we get a lot of calls about disability in our office. That's 60% of our calls. And we haven't grown. But we're not the only service out there. I have to say we were having a bit of a conversation about that this morning. So, I mean, you know, I know at least one other person at the table has looked at budget proposals, and we know that that is going to be a generous budget proposal when we're trying to do other things in the state. So, Ivanova, do you have some thoughts about that too? Yeah. Because I know that UW and LEND and DVR, those are all things.
So for education, I think that we should invest in having more funding for educators, and I think we need to start moving away from the model of the self-contained classroom. Mm-hmm. I don't think any student, no matter what the disability is, I don't care how severely intellectually disabled they are, they have every right to have access to academic courses as anyone else. And I think putting funding to make sure that everyone has an equal education is very important. And I also think mental health is another important aspect. Like, I really appreciated the counselors and that I worked with in my school who really helped me with the self-hatred I was going through. And so I really appreciated that support, and I think that that's greatly needed for our schools.
Absolutely. Others who are maybe moving into the field, working in the field, other ideas? What's on your holiday wish list for addressing disability and inclusion?
I don't know if this is necessarily a school funding issue, but I have thought a lot about what does training on sort of disability allyship or disability like not disability awareness, because I think that term is sort of silly, but we're aware, like
It's there.
but it exists.
Ooh, I just saw one.
But, right, but this sort of like, how do we get teachers to be able to be equipped with having conversations, like you're saying with counselors, but so I'll give a personal example. The first time in elementary school where somebody called me a retard, and I had never like had that kind of interaction. I didn't know how to respond to the student. Like, I had one teacher in the whole building who was able to say, okay, like, let's take you aside, let's process what just happened, let's process the response that you want to have to this student, and then let's move forward with like the way that we can build the school in a sort of more inclusive way so that this kind of thing doesn't happen again, right? And so I think if all teachers had that instinct, and if all teachers had the skills and the sort of ability to do that kind of work all the time, which, like, you know, that's a funding and a time issue. So I don't know, solve that problem, Rhoda. But I think that needs to be a priority around training for teachers.
Yeah. I think too, what kind of goes along with that is actually having diverse staff. When you have such diverse students, but the staff, I know we're all individuals, but when the staff makeup is pretty homogenous, then solutions for issues in school, or, you know, some sort of pathway to solve an issue for that particular day, it's not going to be as useful as having staff that's more representative of the students that are being served.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add also investing in universal design and having it be accessible for all students, and so that everyone's included in the benefits of it. And so we don't have this like, oh, well, that student gets this, you know, because I think that's another struggle that we have is this, people don't understand the difference between equity and equality.
Yeah. I love these ideas. And when I hang out with my friends, I think we should take over school sometimes. But I think we would regret having that job pretty quickly. And so our heart is with all of you who do that work, because it is really hard work. And it is about setting a culture, right?
That's right.
It's about setting a culture in leadership. And we have too few classes in colleges of education that address issues of equity, let alone disability as part of an equity discussion. And we know that principals and teachers, the most conflicts come up over special education and ELL, and so we need to better support and prepare. And every student needs to see a teacher, not just a para, but we can start there, that reflects some of their experience too. If we want to increase the teacher pipeline. So
Amen.
Way to go with Grow Your Own Teachers. Let's talk about having teachers with disabilities in front of students with disabilities. And we're going to move to, we have two questions here. Can I combine them in some way? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks. It's a great resource. We will take that compliment. It is sincere and it is great and we appreciate it. And as you can tell, we get together and we just kind of hit play. So we had another question, and it is important for us. Okay, so we had another question up here as well. And I think that we can talk about this. We are all different, and we all can age into disability and have disabling experiences. And not everything that we wear, you know, every experience we wear is on our sleeve, too. And I think that's important to remember. It helps students feel less alone, too, if you can start to realize that. So we had a question for my colleague. Can you talk about what ideas you might share with a principal or school counselor or teacher who want to get a conversation going in their school about disability identity? Are you doing a road show? Giordano's, are you on the road? Where are you?
You can buy tickets at.
You bet right, soccer.
Oh my God, I would do that in a heartbeat.
It would be fun.
So I think maybe this is connected to Carrie's point about being really intentional about having teachers with disabilities in front of kids with disabilities. That's a tough place to start maybe, but a place to think about. The other thing that I have thought a lot about is bringing in community members and people. So Ivanova, I was thinking about you actually in relation to this. bringing in people into schools to serve as guest speakers, to do a panel like we're doing now in front of students. Again, to the point that that you're not alone, right? Like that there are people who not only have made it through K12, which at the time I think feels a little bit insurmountable, but have made it to a point where we are successful and sort of owning all of our, like, you know, all of this stuff in a really, I think, good way. Yeah. So anyway, I think those are two sort of relatively like people-focused things that we can do, and part of it is just about representation, I think.
I was just going to say, like, one thing that the self-advocacy groups that I'm a part of, we've been trying to do is get into, like, the high schools and talk to students about the bullying that people with disabilities experience, and, you know, that we're all unique and have value. But it's kind of hard to get into schools. They have a lot of restrictions, and so we've been able to get into the special ed classrooms. Like People First of Washington has this program called Student First, and you have these trainers, the DD advocates, that go into the schools and teach about self-advocacy to the special ed students. But we haven't really mainstreamed it, and so I definitely think that is something that we should work on and focus on.
Look, Ellie says we can come to our school.
Oh, I would love to do that.
We can come, and you can replay this later too for your school.
Oh,
we could
good.
do a more G-rated focused version for you at any point.
I just wanted to share a really, really quick story, no names. So someone was at a meeting, and it was in a room full of, I don't know if they were teachers, it was school related, and the idea of having like para-teachers came up, and someone had made the comment that, well, not everyone is going to be able to do that, and really I just wanted to start there in talking about what can one do to open the conversation, to start thinking about, well, who's talking about the para-teachers with disability who wouldn't be able to, like, let's not start there, like, let's talk about, I mean, you cannot have a disability and the classroom is just not for you, right? And so let's talk about people with disability who would be able to be para-teachers. Like, let's start there, because that just, I'd imagine, I mean, I wasn't in the room, I just heard the story, but I'd imagine that there would be an automatic shutdown by talking about who would not be able to do so.
Yeah. We have another question. We have some great questions, and we will definitely follow up with Ali too. So one question that came up, I saw it kind of got scrolled down, is there any advice on how to get the conversation started, even at a school that has a strong focus on inclusion, between parents, students, educators, on how to listen and hear the student perspective? And this came up about the crutch comment. Yeah. It's so interesting because I even have a child at a school that has a real focus on social emotional learning, and I swear it's like an alien has landed when I arrive as a disabled parent there. And I think that really does involve bringing in parents into this conversation too, right? It really does. Other parents. And then, so we can talk about that. So how do you get the conversation started? And I'm going to combine Janine's question in for the sake of time, because we have a couple more minutes before we wrap up. But what are your thoughts on different learning styles? Maybe that's part of getting the conversation started, especially for students who learn differently. So talking about getting the conversation started about inclusion, and making different learning styles part of it too. Not like, hey, we got a ramp out front, and
right.
we had a disabled speaker come in 5 years ago. But what do we do to shift that culture at the heart when it comes to learning too?
Yeah. One thing, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, is not everyone can read and write, but there are a lot of people that, even though they can't read and write, they still have passion for academic courses and academic things, and they want to learn about our government, they want to learn about things in our society, but they're not given the same education opportunities because they can't read and write. And so I've been thinking about is, can't we have different ways to express intelligence other than reading and writing? You know, could somebody orally tell you what they've learned? Could somebody express it through artwork or through physical activity? I think we need to look at non-traditional ways of learning and expressing knowledge, and stop just saying, oh, the only way to get access to academic courses is you have to be able to read and write. I think that puts a big, huge barrier in front of a lot of people, and that's why you have the self-contained classroom, because the IDD people that can read and write, they get mainstreamed, where the people that don't, they get left behind. And I think that's one learning thing that we really need to change, is we need to have different ways to express knowledge and broaden that to allow more people to be included.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Think about that first. How do we hear and listen to the student? Because I'm thinking about where I would have been in high school, and I would have not wanted anybody to. I would have been very reluctant to trust teachers to have that conversation sort of automatically. So I think part of this allyship piece with being a teacher who's working with kids with disabilities in particular is to make yourself available and say, like, I know that, you know, the way that I've heard people talk about disability in this school is not okay, and I know that bullying happens, and sort of like name the things that you hear are going on in the school, but don't require them to sort of like jump in there with you. There's a trust building thing that needs to happen, but that one-to-one individual relationship and you sort of saying, I'm here and I'm open to hearing those things is essential, I would say. So it is always about those relationships.
Yeah.
And I would also say just like advocating so that there is, I keep going back to this because I think it's absolutely crucial, but to advocating for having more diverse staff in schools. Yeah.
That makes a huge difference on a daily level. I think, I was a law professor, and so many students coming to me and disclosing their non-apparent disabilities because they saw me and realized that's something that they could share. And so whether it was mental health related or a learning disability or something else, something relating to trauma, and then extend it out. So the more you diversify, thinking about gender identity, thinking about race and ethnicity, just having points of safety and contact for students. We're not going to get in a situation where we have one of everyone, right? We're talking about how we're uniquely, to the extent that you feel safe sharing those differences that you might experience in your life, and that you partner. I think teachers and principals and parents and alums of the school and community partners, like all of these folks, can partner with you to have conversations, to facilitate a conversation. So it's not just a 1 hour sensitivity training or something like that, but really what are the issues within your school? And I know our office is happy to do that. It's an ongoing conversation. What's been coming up? Where are our blind spots? Because we have both explicit and implicit biases. I love Avenue Q. There's an Irreverent song there that says everybody's a little bit racist sometimes. And I would say that everybody's a little bit ableist sometimes or discriminatory in other ways, so you can put your adjective in there. And it doesn't mean that we're not good people or that we aren't trying, but the more that we have separate classroom environments, the less interaction that we get in a natural way. And so what happens when people are 18? Clearly you have an understanding of what I think about inclusion and what the rest of folks here do. What I want to do is just honor all of your time. I wanted to let you know that the PowerPoints are online if you were joining us by phone. It has our contact information there by email. You can always contact the OEO at oeoinfo@gov.wa.gov if you have follow-up questions or you want to partner. And then our phone number is 866-297-2597. And is there anything that you'd like to say quickly? I want to just thank you all because you're wonderful people to have as friends and to learn from and to commiserate with. And I think, there is that safety. We're become more of ourselves. Yeah. I don't think my government colleagues realize I'm so irreverent, at least the ones in Olympia. But it's nice to be in family. I mean, we find a way to be in family even though we've had separate experiences. That's right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for joining us. Please share with your colleagues when it's up. So check the OEO website in a couple of days, and I will send you all an email as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Bye.
Let me hang up first.
Well, that's